Alexandra, great to see you again. Thank you for making a bit of time to talk about what you're doing. You're right in the middle of the whole kind of AI revolution. So what you're doing is absolutely fascinating. Well, I think it's fascinating, and I'm sure other people will think it's fascinating. So thank you for making a bit of time to tell us about your business and how you're building it. Just to kick things off, I mean, tell us what you're trying to achieve.
Yeah, well, I mean, first of all, Paul, thank you so much for having me on. Always a pleasure. What are we trying to achieve? To take a very quick step back, we set up Evident just shy of 3 years ago to map publicly the biggest organizations in the world globally on their AI adoption progress. No one else had done it. We were a particularly well-positioned team to do that because we had built the Global Index for Nations back in 2018 on measuring sort of AI development and deployment. So the big banks in particular, because they're sort of further ahead than other sectors, asked the question of using your methodology, could you map for us what our performance is against our peers, given how much we spend on technology and AI specifically,
Hmm.
and we want to know how we're performing on the use of investments and use of AI technologies in our businesses. And so the establishment of Evident was to do exactly that,
Okay.
map businesses on AI progress, so they had some way to compare where they stood in that race.
Okay. Let me
Yeah.
ask you, sorry, about that point, because it's quite an interesting point you've made. Why does that matter to banks and big insurance companies and people like that? I mean, why are they bothered about that particular issue? I mean, I know they are, but why?
Well, it's completely existential today.
Hmm.
If you are if you're investing in AI, because if you're not, I think you sort of might want to quickly start doing that.
Yeah.
And if you are investing in AI and in AI heavily, you want to know that you're putting that money to good use. You don't want to be investing as much as your peers, but getting much less out of it. And the reason why it's so existential is that if you get it right, you'll be able to cut out a lot of costs. You'll be able to make a lot of
Okay.
savings. You've got revenue uplifts that are sort of immediate. And essentially, it helps you completely transform your business, which we are now obviously observing, given what, that we've been mapping this for 3 years now. We can see where those transformations are happening. But the reason why they care is because it's a lot of money, right? JP Morgan's tech budget is $17 billion a year. And a
Wow.
large chunk of that is spent on AI. And so you want to know if you're JP Morgan or if you're Goldman Sachs or if you're BNY Mellon or if you're HSBC or if you're an insurer or you are an asset manager, how are my dollars spent in terms of the impact that that is having? And you want to over index on that. You want to be smart with your money. You want to have the right talent, and it's not an easy thing to get right because there are many factors that you've got to really understand and to make, to turn all the screws at the right time with the right people, with the right funding, with the right selection, and so on. It takes a lot of effort. So
I
yeah.
get, I can see why that's important to
Yeah.
your clients. I mean, tell us a bit about evidence. So, what is it about evidence? What is distinctive? What is particularly special about evidence? I mean, what puts you ahead of your competitors, for example?
Yeah, but we're the only ones who do this. So the
Well,
distinctiveness is that we probably were the ones who dared do this.
right. Okay.
May I just add that going out and ranking the biggest financial services against each other on their AI capabilities is either very foolish or very brave. Um, I think it's probably a bit of both, but you've got to be really sure that you got the methodology right. We did spend almost a year building the methodology, and it is, it's very strong, and um, it is it is one that is now referenced
Yeah.
by them all, internally, externally, in their investor relations materials, and also vis-a-vis each other.
Sure.
And so it has become a big reference point across the sector. So consultancies will do other types of projects that might have a little overlap. Consultancies are obviously really good at going in and embedding with the organization for transformational change. We don't do any consulting. We only do really detailed in-depth mapping, both from
Right.
the outside in and the inside out. And so Evident was really born from this observation that this didn't exist, and that we were very well placed to try and plug that gap where there was a demand and no one else was out doing that at the scale that we're doing it.
Yeah. And did you, I mean, tell me about the moment when you realized that banks, for example, would want to do that all around the world. I mean, because it's not just, you're not just working in London, are you? I mean, we were, I mean, when did you have that moment when you thought this could be a really big global thing?
Yeah, I think it was just ahead of setting up Evident. So just 3.5 years ago, it was very clear that when I think it was the third big bank, and they were not UK banks, they were big global banks, had asked, and unrelated to each other, whether it would be possible to build a ranking or some kind of benchmarking on AI performance. And when the third bank asked, I was 100% certain that this was something that would be very much in demand. And keep in mind, this was before the release of ChatGPT.
Yeah.
So we were looking at traditional AI. We were looking at some, other emerging technologies. We were actually looking a bit at quantum. We were looking at sort of what was the story with the blockchain and crypto, but very much sort of 99% was on AI and the traditional AI. So we were also very lucky with timing. We built the index and released it more or less the same time as ChatGPT got released. And when the world exploded and every CEO and every board member wanted to know what to do, because all of a sudden you've got, a whole load of use cases that were not solvable with traditional AI, only solvable with generative AI and the large language models. And a new universe got opened up. And so the question was, what do we do? And how do we compare at this stage against our peers? And now that's only accelerated in terms of
Yeah.
comparisons. Who's got what in production? What is the most obvious agentic AI use cases? How do you organize yourself and move swiftly? Those have become much more pressing than ever. And that's what we go in and track as well.
Sure. And presumably, I mean, this is a fairly obvious question, but presumably you're using AI yourselves within that process. Is that right?
All day, yes, long in every function that we do, whether it's data gathering, whether it's automation of certain pieces of analysis, whether it is actually helping us do some of the analysis. As you know, AI tools are very good at making you think deeper and deeper and deeper. The more you interrogate the data set that you have, and the ability to pull in other data sets to really explore and answer some of the questions that you have. So we use AI to interrogate our data sets. But the more you use AI, the better your thinking is, the better your product is, and the more you grow. And I think there is a little bit of a misperception, as in you use AI and then you cut your team. You use AI, you get better products, you get more market reach, you can do things cheaper, you can do things faster. And so our observation on that account, not with ourselves only, but when we're looking at the big organizations in terms of headcount and use of AI, is that the banks, so insurers and so on, that are using AI the most are actually the ones that are growing the most and hiring.
Yeah.
And the banks that are not using AI yet or not leaning into it are actually the ones that are shrinking, because their clients aren't happy, their customers are not getting the kind of cutting edge ability to zero in on exactly what your needs are and serve it up very quickly. You're not taking out big chunks of costs and so on from your businesses, so you're ending up just being a more sluggish business. And that, as I said before, it's existential. We're already seeing that massive gap growing between leading AI organizations and the ones that are lagging in terms of their AI investments.
So a really important message there, isn't it? We lean into it, make it work for you. Let me ask you, when you realized it could have a global impact, what did you at that point think the biggest obstacle was that you were going to have to overcome to achieve that? What was the thing that you thought, this is going to be the thing I've got to get past?
It's a bandwidth question. you're really only held back in terms of your expansion in our particular, in our particular sector, or as a benchmarking business, in having the manpower to think through, so what are our hurdles, right? Are the data sources comparable? The issue of going global is that you're using data sources that are different.
Yeah.
Like North America and Europe will have a certain similar pattern of the ways that they, that from where you draw your data from. So that's one hurdle, and that's simply a sort of that's not something you can hand over to AI. You've got to really look through what are the comparable data sources, and are they comparable enough for us to use them? And if they're not, what are the alternatives, and how do we make sure we're comparing apples to apples? And so that for us was the biggest hurdle. Once that is solved, then you can build like you were building before, and you can scale, and you can move very quickly. So people, I think you'll probably, a lot on this podcast will tell you the same things, right? It is people that allow you to go global, but that help you to do the thinking that gets you into the global stage.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, that old adage, people are your most important resource, is true. I mean, on the assumption, of course, that they're doing the right things, is my old view about that. But we'll come back to the sort of people a bit in a second, if you will. In terms of your thinking about the role of the CEO, so I mean, what is it about that mission that you've just articulated? What is it that kind of gets you out of bed every morning to go and get stuck into that? Because it's a tough job being a CEO, isn't it? I mean, there's good days, there's bad days, there's one problem after another. I mean, what is it that motivates you?
I think, first of all, the thing that motivates me, and I'm a very early riser, may I say, and so I get up very early because this is really exciting. And I think that I feel that we are literally at the heart of where the whole world is right now. We are in the engine room of adoption. And every, one of the big tech companies, whether you're Microsoft or Google, whether you're Salesforce or SAP, are dependent, and their share prices are based on that, a certain pace at which AI adoption is going to take place. And I'm in the front seat of seeing whether that's actually taking place or not, right? Because we're seeing, what areas is AI adoption going fast? Where is it that it's being held back? Could it go faster? Why is it not going faster? What are the aspects that all of the businesses that are trying to use these tools are facing? And are we talking about getting, really far in AI adoption in the next year or two? Or are we talking about is really 4 to 6 years before we're going to see that real hit on the bottom line from when AI is like fully implemented? And I think what we're all seeing is that it's like slowly, very quickly. So what gets me up in the morning is that I couldn't imagine being in a more exciting and interesting conversation right now. So that's part of it, right? And then you've also got a team that's, lucky to have a team that's very dedicated. So you get up to have the conversations with your team. You get up to have your conversations with your clients, with academics that are leading the charge on the front end, with the tech companies that are grappling with a ever faster evolving state, of innovation, right? There's a new model every day. You've got a gen to agentic. You then got the quantum on the horizon. You've already got an intersection of AI and quantum, and that's moving faster and faster and faster.
It's kind of a once in a lifetime opportunity to be at the heart of that, really, isn't it?
Yeah.
I mean, on the basis of what you're saying. I mean, there's not, it's going to expand, but you're not going to be doing this again, are you? This is a once in a lifetime opportunity. Let me ask you, I mean, there is a huge amount going on. One of the things I think is challenging is, how do you as the CEO kind of cut through the noise, all the billion things that you could be doing, to work out what you need to do? So how do you work out what you're going to do and what you're not going to do? How do you cut through the noise? What's your take on that?
Yeah, I think if you sort of unpack that a little further, you've got to work out, how do you at the same time build the company and do a lot of the cutting through what we choose, at the same time as running the company. And I think they're two very different things, and in some ways require a bit of different types of skill sets. because building the company, and I have a phenomenal co-founder who's very good at running the company, because I'm probably more in sort of what is the next thinking, what's the next product, what is it that are the main pain points today, this week, this month, for the businesses that are out there adopting AI, right? And how does that translate into what we want to deliver from a data perspective? Because then you've got to constantly be speaking to people in the engine room, as I said, and you've got to cut through and say, I believe that this is what everyone's going to need down the line in 2 months and 6 months and in 8 months and so on. And you've got to just be quite quick to make a decision and really trust your decision. But I think if you're so enveloped in the conversation, it seems like relatively easy decisions to make, because if you've got to put a hierarchy or a list on the sort of the most important pain points or areas of focus, you can do that quite easily if you're in the flow of the conversation.
So if that's relatively easy, let me ask you, what's the hard bit?
The hard bit is looking at sort of what's around the corner, I think, is the hard bit.
Because it's evolving fast, isn't it?
It's evolving fast. I can claim that I can make a decision as to what to do right in front of me, but I think the hard bit is to really think about where from a technology perspective, and I think everyone's facing this, right? It's really difficult to see sort of beyond that, what is the next level of the technology innovation, and how do you prepare for that? So I think that's and I think execution is also the really hard bit. It's like, okay, got the idea, know where we're going, and then you've got to be like, okay, now what? Now who's doing what? What are we testing? What sort of timelines are we putting on it? Like the decision, like putting it on rails so it's running, and making sure that you've got the team with you and can see that that's a really good idea, but also making sure everyone is together in the same. I think the most difficult situation you can face is if you've got a team that are not pointed in the same direction. And if they're all pointed in slightly different directions and are doing extremely great things, but it actually only sings if everyone's pointed in this.
I mean, I was about to ask you about that. I mean, we touched on the team bit earlier on. I mean, just what's your take on, if you like, getting the right people on the bus? I mean, the labour market's very tight, has been for a while. You need people with pretty high level skills and knowledge. You're working in a critical sector, banking, a lot of security issues, there's a lot of, how do you get the right people on the bus?
We get people who get in touch with us because they're deeply interested and have background in this, understand the sort of the intersection of understanding their technology and understanding how it's used. And so in that regard, we're very lucky. But we also have, we have a big intern scheme. We want to create a pipeline. We take on graduates. We have partnerships where we try to sort of, we want to have a funnel of talent coming into the business. Our team is now 50 plus, and a big chunk of our team is quite young, and really strong sort of management team and really strong senior leadership team, of course. But we're quite precise in what we're looking for. We try and make our what we're listing, what we're looking for, is really clear, and then people apply to things when they. And I think having unclear job descriptions does no one a favor. I think you've got to be extremely clear of what you want.
I mean, it always helps if you know what you're looking for, doesn't it? Really,
that's the
you've
thing.
got some hope of finding it.
Yeah. So we actually have a head of people in our office who manages all our hiring, and he's a godsend, because spending time on being really precise on what is needed in the business. And we're sort of we're very specialty business, right? The benchmarking, tracking, mapping, and doing everything being led by data requires, obviously, you've got a really strong data team, but also a really strong analytical team, and so on. So, but then the people aspect sort of deeply ties into your strategy. So it really forces you to really think about, I mean, every CEO has to do that, to think about the strategy this year, next year, the next 3 to 5 years, what does that look like? But you need to get really precise to map out your people needs.
Yeah.
So,
On the people front, so I totally get your point about making sure you get the right people on the bus and how you do that. There's quite a lot of crossover though between skill sets, I think. How do you get the right people in the right seats? What's your take on that?
yeah, but it's back to being very precise. We have a data team that have a very, very clear remit on building the indexes. They need a very, very specific set of skills. And so we're very precise in our job descriptions. Then we've got an analytical team that it's much more about pulling together the data, building our trackers, drawing out the analysis of what we're seeing trend wise. We've got diagnostics and that we, and analysis that we work with all of our clients on. So that's a very different skill set. And then we've got engineering team that build the great dashboards that lie, on our platform behind the scenes, that our clients have access to, and sort of figuring out what's the best way to build this, so it's most user friendly. How do we upload the data? How do we automate all of that process? So each task requires a very specific skill set. And so we make sure that we are precise and we put the right person in the right seat.
Okay, I get that. And you can see the sequencing there. You get the right people on, make sure they're in the right place.
Yeah.
The
Yeah.
final question I wanted to ask around that is how do you then create the conditions that enable people to perform effectively? I mean, what's your take on that process, which is slightly bit more nebulous, isn't it?
Yeah, conditions around performance, I think there's a number of factors that go into that. One thing is the roadmap for that team or that person laid out super clearly? Is that laid out so it's really clear how that works in the context of the bigger ambitions or KPIs or vision that we're trying to reach as a company? If you've got those two squared up, we spend a lot of time on that, so everyone's very clear. I think that's really important for you to wake up and go to work every day and you know exactly what you're doing and why it's important. We do a lot of internal meetings as well, bring everyone into the strategy. We do all hands. We do, we do lunch and learns. We do breakfast conversations. We even run a book club on,
Oh, really?
Yes, we do, because reading is a very much part of this journey.
Yeah.
Reading blogs, reading books, reading sort of what's going on the cutting edge here or in the world in terms of the sort of dynamics between tech and business and so on. So we do a lot of that, and everyone's sort of in the same frame of mind. But you've also got to have really good progression structures around, so where you're going. If you do a good job, there's going to be a progression pathway for you to be promoted or, go to the next salary level and so on. I think that's just really important for anyone at any stage in their job, at any point in life. You need to know what you're doing. You need to know that if I do a good job, that it's rewarded.
Sure. Sure.
So
And I mean, the whole point about getting people that know what they're doing is so that you can serve customers effectively, isn't it? Tell me what's your view? What does a great customer look like, or a great client? What does a great client look like to you?
a great client is when we've got the similar level of intellectual curiosity.
Right.
When you get on a call and it's suddenly run over by 45 minutes because you're deep in the weeds of something that is so interesting to you both that it actually doesn't even feel like a client, a client relationship. That it is. So those are, of course, the really enjoyable clients. Great clients are some that feel that you're really on the journey together and we're all in this learning, and they're doing and we're mapping, and it goes hand in hand. And that deep understanding of the importance of both, right, of course, is and that this is to some extent also a bit of is an academic intellectual endeavor. What is the ceiling reach of LLMs? Is that hit, and what's around the corner? What can fully autonomous agentic AI actually do? So you're sort of out in a, thinking through what a world might look like, that you sort of, it's hard to look around corners again. And if you have those conversations with your clients, I think you're very lucky.
And what would you expect clients to be saying about you? or your business?
Oh, I would hope they would say the same, that they enjoy the journey together, that they like the
Mm.
intellectual debates, that they drive, a lot of value from being able to see something that they couldn't see before,
Mm.
and that we're the only ones who provide that. So we provide for the first time real transparency in the business of AI adoption. Like,
Mm.
for anyone grappling with, you've got a CEO or board saying, what is our next step? And hopefully, and if you're just looking inside, right, it's sometimes a bit hard to make those decisions. But
Yeah.
if you've got the clarity and the transparency of what others are doing, it helps. You're on the right track. And I would say also being able to provide, like, what does really good look like? What are the leading, there are only few really leading, in this case, banks out there. Like, what does a gold standard look like?
Mm.
And so those are questions we get a lot. And I think if a client says something about us, I hope that they would say that providing the depth, the mapping, and the transparency of what others are
I
doing.
mean, it seems to me you're helping to define what the gold standard is.
Yeah, I mean, I think we end up being in that place not because that was by design, um, in some respects, but I think you end up weighing in on definitions and weighing in on what good looks like and weighing in how long time should it take before your onboarding or your KYC process is fully automated. So we can show what that looks like, but also when it comes to definitions of what is the definition and how do you actually measure return on investment? This is the biggest debate for us right now because everyone is hyper vigilant, hyper focused on the ROI question because that unlocks further
Yeah.
resources.
And it sounds simple, but it's not, is it?
It is not simple, and every bank, every organization will do it in different ways because
Yeah.
of legacy reasons, because of lack of transparency. But like, they want to know how others are doing it. But anyway, we're collecting all of that data because
Yeah.
everyone submits behind this, not everyone, but the large majority of the organizations that we track publicly also submit privately data on their use cases, on their ROI, on their time to production, on their hurdles, and so on. And every bank, insurance company, asset management company will have a different way of mapping their return on investment. You're looking at how do you track efficiency gains?
Mm.
That is done very differently. How do you track how you're translating that into a dollar value? Is it a cost cutting exercise or is it a revenue uplift that you're wanting to see out of it? That depends on your strategy too. And so what we're trying to feed back to the sector is this is what the majority of the organizations and how they are measuring their return on investment. So you can take it and use it. And what we're seeing is that actually because of that, us feeding it back is now ending up where the sector is sort of converging on the way that we're putting it out. So you end up by default establishing, best ways to,
And
definition of.
that was my point about you. You're helping to define those things, aren't you?
Yeah,
Which must be really interesting to
yeah.
do.
I mean, it's my hope is that it's really helpful and it's
Mm.
can become, a standard, maybe a global standard over time, and that hopefully is really useful because otherwise it's all over the map and someone is claiming something in terms of their ROI and someone says, well, we measure it differently. Because the reason why it's important to have some convergence on ROI is because you're going to get more and more of your shareholders and investors and people who track all the equities and so on, that as announcements of ROI become more and more prevalent, that it's measured in the same way as
Mm.
what the industry is going to start looking for,
Yeah.
because you want to have conformity on that. You
Yeah.
want to have conformity of what an agentic AI use case is. You wouldn't believe the range
Yeah.
of definition of agentic is. So we're trying to create some organized thinking around that. Even things like, what is an AI use case in production? Is it when it's in pilot but production, or does it have to be fully in production? And everyone has a slightly different definition. So we try to weigh in on definitions for sure.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think my reading of that would be that's pretty helpful to people because often my guess is your thinking will be ahead of lots of people. So you're helping them work those things through for themselves. Let me just move on to I mean, you mentioned being all over the map, right? I mean, let's talk about kind of going into new markets. When I talk to CEOs, on the one hand, some CEOs say, I do a lot of work, I get boots on the ground, I do research, I go and talk to partners, I go on trade missions. And on the other hand, I talk to CEOs and say, well, I just follow demand. There were some people who said they wanted it over there, so I'm going to go over to Finland or wherever. What's your take on the kind of process of entering new markets? Give us your angle on that.
I completely agree with the second
Right. Okay.
person you were quoting. We go with demand. Now there's a sudden, demand. People are getting in touch with us from the financial services all across the Middle East, and so we're like, oh, okay. So then, we don't just pile in. We really think about, what is the addressable market? What is the size of the banks? We take a little bit of a temperature on like how far is that adoption process actually. I mean, the governments are piling in, as we all know, in Saudi and the UAE into data centers and funding. But is that really trickling through into the private sector? And so we would think about those kinds of things before we would, come up with a solution or come up with a mapping of going into the Middle East or into Asia. We're seeing growing demand from Asia. So we're sort of going through the same thinking there. We're very demand led because we know that if there is demand, they're ready for us. If there is demand, it's because they want some mapping. We're not the type of business that would step into a region if it's not quite ready to be mapped, because you're ready to engage with us if you've got something that you're trying out and you want to know whether other peers are doing the same, or you want to know, oh, I need to build that strategy and we're putting money towards it now. I need to know what really good looks like. If you're going into a slightly less mature cohort, that just it would be too soon. So for us, the absolute best strategy is to go by demand. And it's not just from a regional perspective, it's also just for things that take you deeper into your client relationship. You listen to, we'd like to go into this line of business, or we really like to see over here, I keep mentioning quantum, but like, can you start mapping the quantum use cases for us, or that? So we go with what they want. That's
I mean, as you were speaking, I mean, the thing that was going through my mind is, it's easier to build a good relationship with somebody who wants to do the thing that you're doing, because you're not pushing them into it. They're pushing, aren't they? They want to go down that. It's much easier to build a productive relationship. That was what was going through my mind as you were speaking. So I'm with you on that. Let me ask about as you move into different markets. Has your business evolved? Is it changing as you go into different parts of the world and develop new ideas and things? I mean, what's happening on that front?
Yeah, I think as you go into new markets, that happens simultaneously as you go deeper with your clients. And as you probably hear all the time, you're constantly evolving.
Yeah.
And you're evolving from every conversation you have, from every meeting you have, from every mapping exercise. You learn things, you feed it in, you iterate, you improve, you roll out again. And so we are on that journey, the constant iteration, and which is also really great, right? Because you're taking some of your clients with you in terms of, should we just test that? I've had an idea. Let's, what do you think? And that constant iteration just helps you, roll out more, and when you're going into new markets, you also just have to figure out, are your pain points, let's take the Middle East, financial services, are their pain points the same as the pain points in Europe or the US? And even between Europe and the US, there are different pain points because we're in different jurisdictions. And then can you learn from that? Or what can you bring to the table? How does that then feed into maybe an add-on to your product that you didn't have before? So you're constantly, as you're rolling out, you're improving your
I
product.
mean, I think that's what makes business interesting, is that it's always evolving. I mean, the only question is how fast, and sometimes
Yeah.
it goes really fast, sometimes it's not so fast, but it's always evolving. Let me ask you the point you were just making there about different jurisdictions. I mean, doing business in Saudi Very different from doing business in New York. I mean, what's your take on how you manage those kind of cultural nuances as you go into lots of different jurisdictions?
Yeah, I mean, there are a couple of elements to that, right? There are different regulatory jurisdictions.
Yeah.
There are different ecosystems, right? New York, you mentioned New York. New York has a concentration of financial services, and they have a concentration of AI capabilities and AI companies serving financial services. So you've got a super strong ecosystem in New York where you've got the providers are there, but there's also the big banks and their AI teams sit in New York, right? So there's a lot of exchange. That ecosystem is very strong. And if you're in Riyadh, you know, that ecosystem is not there, right? So some of that you can bring to the table, right? Because you can bring those conversations and you can bring those insights to a place that doesn't have that strong an ecosystem. And that goes for even Europe doesn't have that strong an ecosystem
No, that's right. Yeah.
so you could even do that, that argument holds for bringing some of that dynamism into some of the sort of clusters here across Europe. But then there's a regulatory difference too. You've got a very different, the banks we work with out in Singapore have very clear regulatory guidelines. You've got a government that's really focused on adoption. The guidelines are not less restrictive per se, but they're just very clear and they've been there for a long time. So the banks know exactly where they are operating. And their local, regulatory bodies are also quite quick at responding to how to solve, oversight for new technologies that are throwing up different, conundrums when it comes to governance and oversight.
And
That,
the
yeah.
thing that strikes me about what you're saying, sorry, just to interrupt there. I mean, what you're describing is really quite significant levels of complexity. I mean, what's your take on keeping on top of that? Because that can't be easy, I wouldn't have thought.
Yeah, but you get on top. We cover a lot, right? This
Yeah,
is we track everything that's coming out, from a governmental perspective. The last night the US just released I would say the White House released their AI Act, right? That's
yeah,
really important to
yeah.
follow. How does that look compared to what Europe is coming out with, compared to what regulatory guidelines there are in Asia? So we track that out of interest and out of necessity. We need to track that. And then the sort of the understanding of the different types of ecosystems and strengths and weaknesses across your Asia, your Middle East, your Europe, and the US. We very much get that from working closely with the businesses out there. So we see it from the inside out. We see their experiences from operating in certain cultures and certain regulatory environments and so on. And so you need to be able to navigate those different environments.
Yeah, yeah. Which of course is, I mean, the thing that was going through my mind as you were speaking is that's partly what makes it so interesting, isn't it? Let me ask you about. I mean, you're very successful now. Was there ever a moment when you thought it may not quite turn out the way I hope it will? Have you ever had those kind of moments along the way? I mean, there's a famous quote that's always goes through my. Muhammad Ali said, "You don't lose if you get knocked down. You lose if you stay down." I mean, what's your sort of take on the kind of the really, because running a business is a big roller coaster, isn't it?
Yeah, I think yeah, it's an interesting one. I think that we set out and were driven by the need to provide something really important to businesses that didn't exist. And the success of the business is great, right? But I think at the heart, it lies with us and my co-founder and the team is a real focus on delivering something that's really, really needed. And there'll be ups and downs. There's absolutely, and it's not so much from a from a from a business growth perspective, but it will be if you hit a roadblock from a data perspective, or if you're looking for a correlation and it's not there yet, right? Or if you've got an hypothesis, and again, it's back down to sort of it's quite an intellectual endeavor, right? Because you might have an hypothesis that you're testing out, and you might be wrong, right? So you're absolutely right. You pick yourself up, you dust yourself off, and you're like, okay, that we need to tweak that hypothesis. So I think that's definitely there. All the time.
And the need for resilience.
And the need for.
Let me ask you, when you look back on that journey, I know it's only a few years, relatively speaking, what's the biggest lesson that you've learned?
Yeah, the biggest lesson is that you've got to have a really great co-founder. I would say. I think when I look at, and read a lot of business books and so on, and the many great podcasts out there, I always have found that the correlation to success is having a good co-founder, because it is if you are together plugging each other's gaps, you're just moving so much faster, right? And so you are building better, you're building faster, you're moving faster. We are moving faster than we thought we would. And I think a lot of that comes down to having a really strong co-founder.
Yeah, and it makes my experience is that it makes the journey more enjoyable as well. It
Yeah,
can be
absolutely.
lonely being
Yeah,
on your own, I think.
absolutely. And I think it's also being happy to really disagree. And again, this might sound a bit like a cliche, but if we really disagree and it becomes, tense, when we walk out the door, we're laughing and we're having a good time, because it's nothing we do is personal.
Yeah.
I mean, in the sense that business decisions of where to go, not to go, who to hire, it's not personal.
Yeah.
This is all about the business.
And let me just ask you about some of those decisions that you've made. I mean, has there ever been a moment when, on reflection, you think, I wish I'd been a bit bolder?
I think that comes every day. I think every day we think, maybe we could be a bit bolder here, and maybe we could
Push
uh,
it a bit more or
push
whatever.
it a bit more. I think that's probably something that we think about literally every day. Could we be a bit bolder? How do we do this faster? How do we reach more? Right? How do we uh I think it's pretty much in our DNA that
I
there is
mean,
there isn't a moment I think back and I think, oh, I should have made that decision. I only can think that, that decision was, I think, a really good one. We should just move it faster. And
yeah.
how do we move it faster? I
I
think
think
that,
your point about the DNA is interesting. My view is that it is part of entrepreneurs' DNA. They always want to go a bit faster, a
yeah,
bit further.
yeah,
That's part of what makes you an entrepreneur. If you want to sit back and coast,
yeah,
those sorts of people don't end up as entrepreneurs, do they? I mean,
yeah.
it's not the mindset really. Let me ask you a couple of final questions here. What are you most proud of in terms of I mean, I know you've achieved an awful lot, but what are the things that you're most proud of?
But I'm very proud when I look out on the team, and it was 50 plus people.
Mm.
We launched 2.5 years ago, and yeah, I walk in, I'm really proud. I'm really proud that everyone's engaged and it's buzzy, and I walk out in the evening and screens, conversations, maybe even the odd, drinks on the roof, we do as often as we have time for. Those are really proud moments. Looking out on that team that's buzzing and excited and building something new and excited about it. That's really proud. There are lots of moments along the way, small moments that I'm really proud of. When someone says, we were able to do this because of what you delivered to us. We didn't know that we couldn't have done this without that particular mapping. That's always nice. When we launched the index in January 23 for the first time, no one ever put out a ranking on AI progress for anywhere, right? So it was a bit bold, right? That felt bold,
Mhm.
felt right, but it also felt bold. And immediately, Jamie Dimon put it in his annual shareholder letter
Wow,
without even,
that
without.
must have had an impact.
I think we were pretty proud. I mean, it was known in the sector. We'd been working on it for a long time. I think it had a lot of credibility when it went out. So but getting that confirmed and get that from Jamie Dimon in his shareholder letter was a really nice thing. And so that was a very nice moment because it was very early days.
Sure.
We were 1 month after launch, and then since then lots of proud moments similar to that. But that was, yeah, very, very happy
Yeah.
to see that.
And what advice would you offer to another entrepreneur who is perhaps just starting out on a journey like yours? What would your big bit of advice be to somebody like that?
Yeah, I mean, again, I'm at the risk of repeating myself, but I think that having a really good co-founder,
Yeah.
lead lead, I would say always, go with demand. If someone can articulate what they need, and that you can deliver that, go with that, instead of trying to build something that you think
Yeah.
people will
Yeah.
come to. In some circumstances, that's the right thing. So I think those would be my
Cool.
my two
Yeah. Yeah.
pieces of advice.
And one final question, which is not about you and your company, but I thought I'd ask it because you're at the center of things. What's your take on how AI is going to change your world
Yeah.
over the next few years? I mean, give us your view from an insider's perspective on the way you think things might unfold over the next few years.
Yeah, I mean, there's no doubt that obviously AI, and this is partly the premise of the business, is going to be completely
Mm.
transformative. And I don't think that anyone is in doubt. I think the question of um, how, shouldn't we, lean into AI, which was the discussion maybe sort of a year and a half or 2 years ago. That's obviously now, we're in it, and this
Mm.
is going to be here forever, and it's going to be completely transformative. My view is that it's going to take a little longer to get fully.
And what makes you say that? Because everyone else is saying it's going to be faster. I mean, what makes you say that?
I worry a little bit about the narrative out sort of in the media. There are sort of the people who think about it through the lens of being apocalyptic, and that there's a real existential risk with AI, and societies are going to suffer, and it's going to be the end of humanity as we know it. And I think that's a really dangerous position to take, because there's obviously increasing risk with as technology evolves, that social media is going to be worse and things can be built. Those capabilities are there. Of course, it's just going to be accentuated with the capabilities that AI has. But we just need to be, like we've needed to be always, be careful about how we regulate things from a sector perspective, right? So social media platforms, should always be considered in a certain way, even before AI, right? Should we have completely
Mm.
no guardrails on social media? That's not an AI question. That's a platform question, and it's a who takes responsibility for what from a media platform perspective. Likewise, drug discovery, using AI is going to speed up
Mm.
how we don't do things, but the guardrails should be around that are specific to drug discovery,
Mm.
right? So the short answer is that the reason it's taking so long, just to get back to that question around sort of the voices out there, existential risk and sort of overhype that it's going to be now, when you flip a switch and it's here and it's going to be amazing, it's going to transform everything you do, and the promises that all the big bank CEOs and the big CEOs of companies across many sectors are looking at that sort of promise and saying, but when is it here, right? And the teams are working very fast to try and deliver it. And we're in the middle. We're in that middle ground. In order to adopt AI, you need to have your data infrastructure in place. You need to have removed sort of human resistance to actually putting it in place. You need to have your governance structures there. You need to find the funding to pay for AI tools and people to implement it. And it just takes time. That all takes time. So I think what we're going to see going forward is that we're going to see it's going to go slowly, slowly, and then suddenly it's going to go really
Mm.
fast, because we're in
As all
the.
the bits of the jigsaw come together.
Yeah, and it's sort of, it's with these things, these are exponential, and the curve in the beginning is sort of quite slow, and then it goes up exponentially. And that's because it takes time to knit together the back ends and the data and all of the
Mm.
rails on which AI runs. That takes time to build. But when it's there, it can completely transform. We'll
Yeah.
get there
Yeah.
eventually.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, my take on it is whichever way it plays out, it's going to be an interesting few years. So, Alexandra, thank you for taking the time to talk us through that. I mean, some really fascinating insights, and a really enjoyable conversation, as always. So, thank you for making time to come and have a chat with us, and I look forward to catching up with you again soon, hopefully.
Absolutely, Paul. Thank you so much for having me. Such a fun conversation.
Cheers, Alexandra. Bye bye.
Bye.